I'm excited to introduce this session, and it's a real honor to be the host of this with Elizabeth Debold and Thomas Steininger presenting an incredible panel and a discussion. I will let them introduce the panelists, but I'll introduce them briefly. I have had the true gift of knowing these wonderful folks for over 10 years now, and spending lots of time on retreat with them and learning with them, from them, working with them, for them, and there are, I could probably count on one hand the people in my life that have helped me evolve the most, that have contributed the most to my personal evolution, and they would be on that one hand for sure, both of them. So Elizabeth Debold, I'm just going to read what they said because they did a great job of introducing themselves, and then pass it over to them. So Elizabeth is vitally interested in creating we spaces where contradictions and differences can be held in an integrative wholeness. From this, something new and unexpected can emerge. She founded One World in Dialogue to create spaces where human beings from around the globe can meet and integrate perspectives. As a developmental psychologist, she is thrilled by the simplicity on the other side of complexity that makes it possible to hold complexity in a new synthesis. This is what One World explores. And Thomas Steininger has a PhD in philosophy, and he is publisher of Evolve magazine, the leading German integral magazine on consciousness and culture. He speaks internationally on cultural evolution and the different spiritual and cultural currents that have formed our postmodern world. He's a faculty member at Meridian University in California. Together with Elizabeth Debold, he created the Emergent Dialogues, an innovative we space practice and pioneering experiment in consciousness, conscious communication, which we use globally. Without further ado, I pass it over to you, Tom and Elizabeth, and I'm going to spotlight you guys until you tell me to have it be a gallery view, but just so you know, we're seeing you.
That's always so weird because then you see yourself, the whole screen. Well, hello, welcome. I'm so glad that to be able to be here with some dear friends and new friends to explore awakening a global integral. And integral integral means whole. It means integration, and yet often that it ends up being a contextualizing system to put other cultures within a certain context. And so we wanted in this panel to be able to bring forward and host. I mean, Thomas and I really are in a host role here for some diverse cultural perspectives that I think are needed and important to integrate and not lose their own integrity in the process.
Maybe just one word. A couple of years ago, in one of the Integral Europe conferences, we gave a talk in Hungary about how integral is not global, and and what we said at this conference, that even the way integral is framed quite often, it's coming from a European, American perspective, and there are different voices around the globe that just are not coming based on this Western European perspective. And how can we have an integral dialogue that holds these different perspectives? And so I'm very happy that we have a chance here to do this. And as Elizabeth said, the two of us are just hosting it. This is basically not about, again, Europeans holding a perspective, but opening up a space where a global dialogue is possible.
And so the way that we'll work this today is this morning, evening, whatever it is, afternoon, is that I will introduce each of our panelists. We have 4 with us today, and then they will each speak for about 10 minutes, and then Thomas will facilitate a conversation between them, and begin to open it up for your engagement, and then we'll have some small groups. And as James has said, if the conversation needs to continue beyond this, we can do that. This is just a beginning. And actually, to begin, I would like us to actually be present with where we are and who we are right now. To be able to, and maybe this is a good time for gallery, James.
So I've turned off your spotlight, but if everybody can click the gallery view in the top right, then we can see.
Yeah,
everybody.
click gallery so you can see everyone, and just take a moment to be here and to look at the faces that are here. And we have James in California. We have Thomas and I are sitting in Frankfurt. Ruth is in Tasmania. Ank is in South Africa. I know Marilyn is in Scotland. Naveen is in India. Here we are, we're in this one space, actually fully present together. We're here, and we're connecting from all these different places on our Mother Earth.
And maybe to appreciate, you already mentioned it when we just met the people we want to introduce to you today, a couple of minutes before, how we are here as persons, but we are also here with the places that we come from. So what we see on screen, we see faces, but you are also at a certain place on Earth. So somehow we are together holding Earth between us, or the Earth is holding us around her. And just to appreciate that there's a unique experience that also the internet provides in this way, being in all these places around the Earth and being together at the same time, and being aware of the global reality, global Earth reality that we're living in, and the different perspectives where you all come from. And just when you look at the screen, just be in presence with each other, and be also in presence with the place that is looking at you as we look at each other.
So with that, let me introduce Ank. Ank Chabalala is has a PhD and a master's in public health. He spans an amazing knowledge base. He's a medical natural scientist, an African medicine practitioner, and an infectious disease epidemiologist. So he's an epidemiologist as well as a traditional medicine practitioner. He's the founder of the Amen-Ra Institute and Infinite Earth, whose objectives are to restore African sciences of consciousness in medical systems. His reason for existence, and I know this is true, is total commitment to serving life through sharing Kemetic, African, Egyptian, and Banitu cosmologies, meditation techniques, initiation systems, and martial arts. He is the current director of the South African Indigenous Knowledge-Based Technology Innovation Department. He is the creator of an Ubuntu-based bio-innovation model used in natural health products development for the upliftment of the poor and marginalized. He travels, studies, and facilitates workshops around the world. So the question we have asked Ank and the other panelists to respond to is what do you see in your own culture and context that in our hopefully moving toward a post-pandemic world, needs to be integrated, needs to be brought to the fore in creating new solutions and a new global culture. So Ankh, please. Welcome.
Good morning, Elizabeth and Thomas, and greetings, James, and everyone else. Am I supposed to share now or just greeting,
Yes.
just introducing?
Yes, please.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to be in this amazing space of the integral world. Maybe I should also, from the onset, it's not an apology. English is not my language, so you will forgive me if I butcher some of the words, or yeah, if my expression is not up to the Queen's language requirements. You started off by saying we should be here in this moment within the context that we are in. Yes, I am within the context of winter, Europe like winter today in South Africa, but also we're starting to see the community spread of the coronavirus. It's disturbing, especially after seeing how it came to Southern Africa and how it slowly left the communities of affluence, and now it's ravaging the poor people, my people, who basically have nothing to implement in terms of the so-called public health measures. That's the context that I'm in at the moment, which is a very painful and hurting context. Integral, you also mentioned from the beginning that often these various concepts that we know of, whether it's through academia, whether it's through the economic systems, whatever system there is on this planet, the ones that are valorized and mainstreamed are actually coming from the North. And all these systems are almost like shoved down our throats, that we need to follow those systems as if they are, as if these systems are progressive, almost within the context of let's civilize the savages, whereas the evidence of all these systems outside the North itself never work within our context. They leave poverty and death in their wake. So this is the context within I'm in. And when it comes to integral, we in Africa had for ages, we had various what today we may call integral systems. And I would like to believe that most people who are in this call, both coming from the spiritual perspective, but I would like to believe that some come from academia. Now, if you're coming from the spiritual context, in Africa, we had the concept, as you said, integral is also a concept. It's a context. I feel it's a conceptual framework within which we organize our minds and our behavior. In Africa, all African nations had integral systems. And the ones that I follow, the ones that have been initiated in, and I share, especially with the younger people, is the ancient Egyptian, ancient Kemetic, before the advent of those who came from the Levant, and of course later on, those who came from Macedonia and Rome, the ancient Egyptian, the ones we call the Kamau, the Kemetic people, were Africans like me and me, you and, well, me, I don't see Africans over there, but they developed a concept called Ma'at, which in Southern Africa we call Ubuntu. Now, Ma'at is the principle of, the core principle of Ma'at is love, is sharing. However, it governs the concept of interconnectedness, interdependence, interrelatedness, and it follows naturally that it's about integral, it's an integrated system. Within the Ubuntu context, the central, the defining concept there is Ntu. Ntu is, if you like, the uncreated existence itself, is consciousness. Hence, we are called Abantu, those of Ntu. As Abantu, we are integrated with what we may call Kintu, Hantu, Umuntu, and Isintu, meaning that we are integrated with time-space. In time and space, there is Ntu. In Isintu, things like your biological or abiological forms of existence, whether you call them the water kingdoms or the plant kingdoms, the animal kingdoms, they also have Ntu. The modes of nature, when we refer to heat and cold, there is Ntu in there. So basically, Ntu is in everything. But when it comes to that which defines us, we call the supreme being, some of you may call it God or Allah. We call our supreme being with so many names because it manifests in so many ways. We call it Ntu. Therefore, when we want to refer it as a singularity, we say it's an umuntu. We call it muntu. And when we refer to ourselves, when I refer to me, I refer to myself as umuntu. Therefore, you can see that our ancient systems are holistic already. That's why when we interact from an ontological point of view, our way of being then defines our worldview, our cosmology. And our cosmology, and it's not only one cosmology, it's many cosmologies depending on what you're talking about. Whether you're talking about agriculture, whether you're talking about archaeology, astronomy, whether you're talking about health, whether you're talking about building society in terms of relationships, in terms of governance, our cosmology stems from our ontology, from what I've spoken about, stems from this concept of Ntu, which then recognizes the importance of being connected to everything. We are everything. In the North, you often say that Ubuntu means you are because I am, and I am because you are. I feel it's an adulterated interpretation of what it is in truth. The truth is that we are everything and everything is us. But central to that is that you are a sovereign being and I am a sovereign being. Therefore, you are because I am and I am because you are. The same thing will apply to plants, to animals, to the environment. So our interaction, our cosmology, our worldview defines how we then interact with the environment. So the interaction, the actions that we take, then define our epistemology, defines how we know. We know from our experiences. We don't know from conceptualization. We know from having interacted with existence. So it's knowledge-based, hence the work that we do is called a knowledge system. So from there, from the fact that we know, that then defines our, you may call them our theories, which are evidence-based, We don't theorize and go experiment. We experiment, and out of the experiment, we then say there is a knowledge system. So this is what I feel the integral movement of the North, if it want to call itself a global integral movement, I feel it needs to then, if I may challenge it, it needs to humble itself and really come down to the South and immerse itself, not through concepts, but through experience. Elizabeth and Thomas said, as I close, I should ask everyone a question. And with what is happening today, James, you are in the US. You're seeing how my people over there are rioting because their backs are against the wall, because the systems are not integrated. Or if the system talks about integration, they're basically talking about phagocyte sources. It's about just swallowing. And I don't have the term, but it's almost like you invade, and then you change the people to be what you are, instead of appreciating the myriadness, the beauty. Our motto, our government motto, we say unity in diversity, that the beauty lies in our differences, in appreciating how different we are, because our essence is the same. Imagine if we are all behaving the same way in a hegemonous way. It's hegemony. The hegemony thing can't work. So we push what we say, if I may use your language, we say let's interface, because the experience of integration has been painful. The experience of integration means I need to drop my culture, I need to drop my knowledge system. So when we interface, at least I still maintain my sovereignty. As Ubuntu itself says, the principles of Ubuntu says, you are a sovereign being, I'm a sovereign being. However, I am because you are, and you are because I am. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ankh. Thank you very much.
Maybe just to say that I also mentioned that I will dash out at around 9:55, because I have another meeting. Now, the question for you all is, maybe this needs to go more to at individual level, not even at organization level. The question is, why are you letting my culture and my people die? Because of your leaders, your multinationals, your professors, your military establishment. Why?
Thank you.
Thank you, Hank.
Yeah, and we will keep that question after you're gone.
Yeah.
For a long time. I feel that to do the right thing, we should stay with this in silence for a while, and yet we need to move on, but not leave this question, not let it go. Thank you. Thank you. Naveen. Yeah.
Yeah, yes, Elizabeth and Thomas.
Naveen Vasudevan. So thank you for being with us today. And I feel a little speechless after what Ankh just left us with. But I want to let me forefront the questions that you bring, or that you say have been guiding your life for the last 15 years. What does it mean to live meaningfully in today's times? And how may I offer the best of myself to the whole? And as we're hearing, that whole needs to include a lot more than usually is put in that whole. Naveen is the co-founder of 2 organizations that are engaged with facilitating a deeper engagement with yoga through a variety of experiential and self-reflective processes. His interests include evolutionary leadership, integral psychology, and process work. He is keen on working with young change makers and those interested in bringing spirituality and social change. He lives in Auroville, India, the community and city inspired by integral yoga and the great Sri Aurobindo. So Naveen, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Deborah. Sorry, Elizabeth and Thomas. I just wanted to say thanks to Ankh before starting, because I was very poignant and I'm quite moved. I'm at a loss of words, actually. So thank you, Ankh. Difficult to go, but anyway, I have written some stuff down. I find speaking a little difficult, so I've written some stuff which I wanted to share. The question that Elizabeth sent us is, what are the unacknowledged gifts from your country or your culture that needs to be brought to the table? Yeah, and I could think of four different themes, which I'll quickly list, and then I'll speak a little bit about each of them. The first one is the depths of yoga haven't been plumbed yet. The second is India is one of the original homes of integral. The third would be the Pandit is not necessarily a yogi. And the fourth is the incredible diversity and density that's present in India. Now I'll expand each of these a little bit. Firstly, yoga has been one of our foundational contributions or practices for a long time. Yeah, and I consider yoga as the art, science, and technology of evolution. And there are multiple traditions of yoga. I'm not talking about any one particular tradition, but yoga as a whole body of knowledge and practice, in its entirety. I consider it to be, in a sense, the bedrock of what Otto Scharmer called yesterday the vertically transformative education. So, and we've been playing with it for a while now, yeah, for a long time. But globally, I feel we're still only scratching the surface of yoga, and at best, it's largely reduced to body and breath work, but there's much more to it. And and it's but it's much more to it, and it's an integral system of self, culture, and growth. And only very few are able to impart this knowledge today, because a lot has happened. In terms of colonization, in terms of modernization, in terms of a lot has contributed to the loss of this form of transmission of knowledge, but it still exists. It's a very slender thread of transmission, but it's still present, it's still around, and it's still unbroken over thousands of years. So I feel this is a real gift that India has to offer the post-COVID world, an explosively deeper engagement with yoga. Because the secrets that it holds, I feel, are still largely unrecognized, forget unacknowledged, but even unrecognized. So that's my first point. Secondly, the way of life in the subcontinent over thousands of years has been based on an integral worldview, or many integral worldviews. And every important aspect of life, was whether it be education, art, planning, politics, food, uh, many important aspects of life, I think, uh, had a certain grounding in dharma, which is basically a cosmic order, and which is probably another name for Ubuntu, as far as I'm concerned. Another name for, and it has many, many names across cultures, but dharma has been one central organizing principle for us. And uh, so, there wasn't just one articulation of integral here. There were multiple articulations of integral, multiple traditions of integral that coexisted in various ways. For example, there was the Vedic and the Upanishadic, the Yogic, the Tantric, the Siddhas, down to modern day Sri Aurobindonian, that Elizabeth also mentioned. So there have been, these are just a few that I've dabbled with a little bit in a very, very amateurish way. There are probably other schools, other worldviews, other forms of other worldviews that I haven't engaged with, that are also part of the Indic universe. So there has been a multiple articulations of integral, and many of them have common ground. All of them have shared ground, common ground. There are a lot of similarities with each other, but I think they also have their own unique differences with each other. So it was already a polyphonic integral universe in some sense, and there's of course space for much more. So that's I think another big gift that India can offer. And these traditions are not completely dead yet, and the embers are still more than alive, and they have a lot to contribute to the larger polyphonic exploration of the integral around the world, because I agree that today, I think some of you mentioned over the last 20, 30 minutes, that a lot of the articulations of integral today seem very Eurocentric maybe, or Western, or I'm not sure, cognitive, a lot more cognitive. I haven't dabbled with this form of integral much, but from a distance, that's what it appears. I could be wrong in my assessment. I'm sorry about it if I'm wrong, but from a distance is what it appears. Maybe I should get to know it better to have a better sense of it. Thirdly, I think the next important thing that India has emphasized and it brings to the table is the importance of direct perception and experience over theory and cognitive wizardry. The best way to understand integral is to root oneself in integral consciousness, the ever-present ground of being. Irrespective of one's profession, at least for a long time, this is of course changed now in recent times, but in India for a long time, irrespective of one's profession, whether one is a warrior, dancer, sculptor, farmer, or a king, it was emphasized, acting from unity consciousness was emphasized as the primary foundation on which any line of vocation could then further be developed. So to be a yogi, or was more important, or a yogini, was more important, or was the foundation on which the pursuit of excellence was mounted. Without this, one couldn't engage with the pursuit of excellence, whatever one's line of vocation or passion is. So I think it's important to bring that back. This emphasis on direct perception, on embodiment. This emphasis on embodiment is very important, I think, to avoid mistaking the map for the territory, or the pandit for a yogi, or worse, the guru. The scholar needn't necessarily be a yogi, or a guru. So the pandit needn't necessarily be a yogi or a guru. One can be, but there is no. It's not necessary. Finally, the point I want to highlight is India's incredible diversity and density. It's well known. We have a wide diversity of languages, religions, climates, ecologies, races, ethnicities, political views, all sort of focused on a relatively smaller piece of land compared to other countries of similar populations, or even comparable populations. And India is probably one of the few places in the world where I feel a large spectrum of human culture still exists, from Stone Age cultures in small pockets in our islands to the ultra modern. It's a huge spectrum of cultures that sort of coexist on a fairly narrow sort of piece of land. So it's also a lot of density. So a lot of incredible diversity in a small piece of land can bring up a lot of it can add to a lot of complexity. And how we've managed the situation over millennia, I think has some lessons to offer the world as we get more diverse. But that said, this ability is under a tremendous attack. It's fraying. The fabric is fraying. India today is getting more and more polarized. I hope that we are able to regenerate our respect for diversity and dialogue, and are able to overcome our challenges. And if we do that, I think we might have something valuable to offer the world in terms of how to work with diversity and make that a gift and a strength. So that's a challenge that's in front of us. So finally, to finish, I'd like to just conclude saying that unless India comes to this party with all its gifts and challenges, our collective evolution might not go up beyond a few notches, because I think it has a lot of gifts that it still has and a lot of challenges that we need to work out, so that other parts of the globe also can learn from it. So I think India needs to be an important player in this. I hope it happens. And the question I wanted to leave with all of you is, what assumptions do we need to unlearn to make the integral movement polyphonic and diverse? Assumptions on both sides. From the global north, what assumptions do we need to unlearn? And in the global south, what assumptions do we need to unlearn? So that we can come together in a synergistic dialogue and then move forward from there. So thank you. Thanks for this opportunity.
Thank you, Naveen. Thank you very much. I think that's a good question. And linking it to Ankh what assumptions do we need to unlearn fast in order not to allow people to die, Ankh's people to die. So thank you, and it seems too abrupt, but I would like to move now to Pai Vilaratsa. Thank you so much, Naveen. So Pai Vilaratsa is the founder of the Maya Earth Village and co-founder of Bahay Calipe in Puerto Princesa City in the Philippines. He's also the founder, creator, inspiration of something called Inner Dance. Actually, and James, could you bring Pai up?
Great, thank you.
Yeah, great. He's initiated various wellness communities around the world and has been the Philippine ambassador and active board member of the Global Eco Village Network in Asia for many years. He's also served as the CEO of the self-health empowerment movement in Cebu City, and he's written 2 well-received books and has facilitated hundreds of workshops with thousands and thousands of people in more than 10 countries in the last 11 years. And Pai, it's wonderful to welcome you.
Hi, thank you so much. Greetings from the Philippine Islands, most specifically from Palawan, where nature is still quite voicing out a lot of messages that I would like to stream through today. So do I just begin, Elizabeth?
Yes, please.
Or
Yeah, just
okay, so
take it away.
So I have a lot of random notes to make visible what is a play of chaos and order in my mind within the present moment. The Philippines is an archipelago of 7,000 islands, and I want to bring up maybe the metaphor of the island as representing a consciousness at this current time and space. In the meeting space between the East and the West, places such as where I inhabit bears witness to quite a lot of many degrees of transformation that's hard to put into words. And it took quite a long period of time to put into language exactly what it was that was happening in so many Europeans and basically people from the global north and from the Occident, people who come here to undergo a deep state of surrender or letting go. So maybe one way of understanding the identity of the Philippines would be to see what Southeast Asia itself represents, where South and East Asia kind of come together in a new way of understanding historicity within the Orient. We're not exactly like our brothers from the South or sisters from the East. There's a kind of in-between state, especially when you consider the history of colonization of the Filipino people. Just today in preparation for this talk, I Googled the term with the white man's burden. And I was actually struck that this was the title of a poem written by the great British poet, Kipling, to speak about the ambiguous, ambivalent event in which the Americans annexed the Philippine Islands from the Spanish. To give a really short historical background to people on the Philippines, they say that my country was 400 years in a convent and 100 years in Hollywood. We were basically underneath American occupation for about a century, and the Spanish had a chance to bring us into an integration of Western, the Western sense all around. It's maybe held us back for such a long period. In fact, I wrote an interesting article last week that considers that the very first day of the lockdown that was announced in the Philippines, it was March 16 of this year. I realized that this is, in fact, exactly 1 year prior to the half millennium anniversary of the Spanish landing, considering the Philippines was maybe one of the first colonized nations in Asia when Magellan landed with the Spanish companions. There's something almost algorithmic about this particular point in time. The Philippines, I think maybe this week, is now officially the country under strict lockdown, the longest. Second, maybe only, longer than China. So I want to speak a little bit about the meeting space of the East and the West within the islands. What has it been like for us not so much to understand our identity from just our remembrance of a narrative or a story that's clear. The Philippine culture isn't really that concrete when you think about Philippine food, dance, it's not the same as when you think about Indonesia or India. There's something very feminine about this place that doesn't really hold on to form as much as it undergoes a mental flow state. There's something about the dimensions of the archaic and the magical and the mythical that is trying to sustain a long waiting period before it enters into an integral mental. And I feel that COVID-19 has really brought about a stark introspection as to what our gifts might be to the globe, starting from the point of view of consciousness. There's not really a cosmology here, the same as you might find a meta-narrative that has taken hold in other places. And what I feel this contributes is somewhat around the post-post. If within postmodernism and post-colonial, there is a sense of grieving and anger that is still in resistance as to why certain things needed to come to be. There's something very genteel and quite receptive, almost absorbent and compassionate as to the many ego deaths that happen in islands in Southeast Asia, such as Bali, or these many places in Thailand that also take place here. I like to think about these processes as a great unlearning that is necessary for our white brothers and sisters, that needs to happen before a relearning process takes place. But from the point of view of the Africa-like settings of Southeast Asia, there's something in this hybrid consciousness that isn't needing to lose consciousness as much as to observe that maybe we're actually only accessing our genuine and authentic mind for the first time. The word integration or integral seems strange for me, because my understanding of the West is actually more of a disintegration that feels far more integrative than the normal pathways that we enter into when we think about structure. There's a lot of order within chaos, in especially the tropical mindset, that I feel if I was to make a singular point and then leading that into a question, what emerges from my culture that might be a contribution is the experience and the remembrance of what's called deep history from this age of the Anthropocene. We need a theory of regression that allows us to understand what is the polarity to progress. The research programs that happen here is the coming together of the developmental and the evolutionary, that the story of the species and the story of the planet is coming into a structural sameness as with the story of the individual. So within the ego death, I feel there is a rising of a collective mind that is still very much present in what some people might call shame cultures, but in fact is thinking and feeling is one. So I think that's my question. How is the story of the one, in fact, in a mirroring process with the story of all of it? Thank you.
Thank you, Pai. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And thank you for bringing in the Philippines.
Yeah. Yeah, it's actually quite a quite a different view on this intersection. And I'm just struck by how much we need each of these perspectives. How not we, life needs this to be known.
Just as a request to all of us who are listening to you and all of you speaking from the Global South, just to let it in.
Mm-hmm.
Just to let it in, and take this also as a chance, because usually we are not exposed to different perspectives. We are much more than we are aware of in the center of where meaning making is created, and we are not aware how in the center of meaning.
So we think.
How is produced, let's put it that way. And we're not aware how we apply it to the different perspectives that are around us.
Mm.
So thank you, Pai, for bringing Southeast Asia in.
And Pai, someone asked if you could repeat your question.
Sure. Yes. If I might need to contextualize it a little bit for it to make sense. If in developmental psychology, we understand the journey from the baby state, which in the neurological is in fact not really blank or empty, but in fact in a perpetual dream REM state. In evolutionary psychology, the story is much more vast and stretches out into something really, really old. But in the spiritual transformations that we're seeing is that people are actually remembering that their story is the story of the earth. So unless we're able to find upon us epistemological ground to marry these two vastly different language domains, we wouldn't have empathy for what merely hosts us. Not so much what is people, but what is that systemic network of memory and remembrances that is within us that we merely host as well.
I also appreciate the depth of your work, Pai.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Ruth. So, hello, Ruth. Ruth is coming to us from Tasmania, and she is a songwoman and storyteller, drawing upon her cultural knowledge and heritage from the Yorta Yorta people. Her mother's Yorta Yorta, and the Tasmanian Aboriginal community where she was born and continues to live. She's part of, and I think a co-founder of, or part of the founding of Nairi Niara, whose guiding principles are connection to country, culture, and to the sacred. And Nairi Niara provides opportunities for people to realign with traditions and cultural practices, which emphasize the importance of hearing the voices of our elders, reclaiming our traditional values of honor, respect, and equality, and listening to the voice of our inner healer spirit in order to promote healthier communities for the future. So, welcome, Ruth.
Thank you so very much, Yatila Tawarawa Narimiara. Deep gratitude to Elizabeth and Thomas and for the invitation, but also for the words and spirit and provocation, the depth of what we've just borne witness to. I'd like to offer a song. I feel like a part of my body is very full at the moment, particularly my mind is very full. And so this is a song, it's a Yorta Yorta song, with the hope that that can really calling in my ancestors to help me with this one. Nada pura fera yamna, pura fera yamna, pura fera yamna yala yala. Nada pura fera yamna yala yala. Pura fera yamna yala yala. Pura fera yamna, pura fera yamna, pura fera yamna yala yala. Good. So pay my deep respects to my ancestral lineage. For the country that I was born on and continue to live here in Lutuita, the homelands of a people, our Aboriginal nations here in Southern Australia. We come from such an ancient traditions and have imbued us with a sense of the ebb and flow of life itself, particularly as our culture, we have survived 2 ice ages. We've also survived colonization and are currently moving through the neo-colonization and the wave of that. And so I have an Australian father and an Aboriginal mother. So my whole life has been about integrating 2 forms of reality and ways of being to come to discover who I am and how I can be in the world. I've also been very blessed to travel since I was very young, and sitting not by particular design, but just by a blessing really, with amazing Indigenous knowledge keepers and storytellers and elders and children, as well as the country itself in different places around the globe that have integrated within inside of myself and been able to unite not only with the storytelling and the knowledges, but also with my own way of learning directly from country itself. And for me, this was probably one thing that my deep hope and desire for the world as we have just come through this very condensed time of contemplation. How do we move forward, first of all, in a way that's egalitarian in its foundation, but also that unites our ancient traditional practices, which are based upon egalitarian societies, as well as embracing the need to respond in a way that helps us honor the diversity that is across the planet. And how do we engage individuals to find their own purpose and passion and the genius that is inside of them, but then also offer that to the collective. So for me, it was one of the things that I've seen, particularly through this time of COVID, is that people are becoming aware of who they are connected to, the place where they're living on. People have got to slow down in a more contemplative way to actually be present to land and country itself. Many people have had to talk to their families, find out who they are connected to. And for me, this is actually foundational within indigeneity. We know that we are interdependent. A lot of our languages don't have the same ways of describing separation or individualized, being an individual, most of our language actually talks about our interconnection. And for me, my hope is that, particularly through uniting principles of technology like we are right now, that those people who haven't been exposed to the voices, our voices, and ancient traditions that have within that a greater knowing of that interconnection, as we draw on both of those ways of being, my hope is that we are emerging to realize this reweaving the web of humanity which is happening on the planet. For me, the last couple of months have very much been around beforehand. I would often take myself out to retreat or sit quietly. I love going for walks in the bush and always singing on country. And I would be praying to ancestors, and I'd be considering what it is that I'm being called to and how to offer that. And yet I'd come back and other people in the family would be rushing around or doing things. And yet what I've noticed is this way of internal reflection and questioning is happening on a great collective scale. This is one of the greatest connective experiences that the globe has seen, in this way that not only can we sympathize with other people, but we have the capacity to empathize with other people. So particularly, I was interested in how Indigenous ways of being, we know we're connected. We know we're the earth. We know we are country. There is no separation in the thought process. That everything that life that forms the plant has formed me. There is no separation between the two of us. And both of us can engage in conversations. Both of us can open our own hearts and minds and spirits and access knowledge so that we can be more in line with what our purpose is. And from that place, we can then offer that to the collective good. Whereas I often see the misrepresentation, the separation from, if I know my passion and purpose, then that is for me. But within our culture, there is no separation from how good it is for me and how good it is for others, how good it is for the planet. It's this understanding that we are all connected and it's all flowing through. As Ankh was saying, the terminologies that he was describing, and all the speakers, Pi and Naveen beforehand, we have traditions, and I call to mind very strongly an uncle who's no longer with us, Tipudi, who is from Mudurjulu. From many of you might know Uluru, the rock that's a sacred site within Australia. It's one of the great sacred places on the planet. He is a custodian of that place, and he talks about Kanini and the principles of that, and how we are all connected, and that once we can come into this understanding that we're connected, that's when we open to the capacity of really learning wisdom. That once we're trapped into a Western academic mind, we fill up our reality, and that we can't possibly really see, there's no space for the deep to call to us. And another of our elders, she talks about Didiri being the song. That's often why we sing, because words don't really, they point to it, but they're not really it. Whereas a song will carry with it the ancient knowledge that is unseen, the subtlety that when we open and give ourselves space, that can form who we are. It informs us and literally forms who we are. She speaks about how Didiri is a deep sound. It's like a spring that comes within us, and it's the sound of the deep calling to the deep. And within the depth of that calling, that song, we talk about song lines that is very much like in the traditions of meridians within the body, there are these points of calling, power points across the planet. And through this deep calling is actually the knowledge system that we need. And through colonization and continuing neo-colonization, there's been a suppression of those practices and traditions and a sense of reality that, of course, we can access those spiritual traditions and wisdoms. Now, what we tend to do is, particularly when our young people are emerging within those traditions of awakening, we pathologize them. We call them mad. We see that when they're hearing the songs, when they're seeing the visions, when they're that we start to think that they're mentally insane. And yet, these are the traditions that have always been awakenings for us. And yet, as there's a rise of stress, anxiety, and mental illnesses, and there's reports both within Europe and Australia and the US that 1 in 5 people in their lifetime, this is 1 in 5, have a debilitating mental illness. And a part of that is this separation from our traditions and practices and knowledges that help us to awaken that there is a reality that is beyond the seen, that is there to help us. It's there to guide us. And that the important role of elders and the newborns is to understand that they are the portal for us to be able to gain the wisdom and access to those places. And so for me, part of that is that the predominant neocolonialism cultures, a big part of what happens is that there is a suppression and a pushing away, a separation of their own ancestries, as though shame, guilt, and not being able to deal with past experiences within our own lineages separates us. And so that we cannot draw on that life force and knowledge and wisdom and capacity to heal and to move forward as a globe while there is that great separation. So for me, the importance of integrating Indigenous knowledges of how to heal those, how to reclaim our relationships with our ancestors, how to listen to countries so that we can access the deep wisdom that is always generously being offered to us. If we come back into alignment, it is natural that we will move towards egalitarian societies. That, as Unc was saying, we won't be in a world where Western leaders are causing great starvation in others' countries, or even here in my own country, where we have great starvation and suppression of Aboriginal people here in a very affluent country. So my question that I feel is arising is, I think first and foremost, how is your relationship with your ancestors? how is your relationship with the country that you live on? When you walk outside, whether or not that's concrete, but just under the surface, it's the depth of heart of country herself, Nalanemana. She is. Where is that relationship? How is it?
Wonderful question, Ruth. Wonderful question. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Maybe before we move on, just to have a moment of silence to contemplate this question, each and every one for oneself, because it is a question to contemplate.
Mm. James, could you bring us back to gallery or allow us? Okay.
Thank you very much. So I don't want to make much words. I just want to invite Naveen, Pai, and Ruth to open up a conversation between you guys. And unfortunately, Ankh had to leave. He had to go to an important meeting, and he apologizes for that.
Yeah, about COVID-19 in Africa. That is in South Africa.
Which is hitting South Africa, starting to hit, and which is related to his question. So whoever wants to open up the thread, you heard each other's voices, you heard the contributions of these different regions of the globe. And I ask all of us also to hear this, that there are people talking to us, but there are also cultures talking to us. There are parts of Earth talking to us. There are parts of our human cultures talking to us, as we are one humanity with different faces. And I would also like to recall one phrase that Ankh brought in, the differentiation that he said between integration, where he feels that he has to integrate into something, and the word that he used to bring in to interface. And yes, Pai, Ruth or Naveen, who wants to start this conversation between you? And it should be mostly a conversation between the three of you.
Thanks, Elizabeth and Thomas and Ruth. It was very moving. I have a question to ask my fellow panelists, if I may.
Mm.
Yeah.
Please.
So, hi, Ruth and Pai. One thing that came through in many of our sharings is our pain with colonization. Yeah, I think all three cultures, including Ankh and all four, we have experienced fairly intense forms of colonization over time. And I noticed that in many of us now, there's a subtle form of othering. There's a certain anger that hasn't been worked with. There's a certain pain that still is very much under the surface, if not overtly. And it often comes through, at least in me, it comes through often. A subtle form of othering, if not a more blatant form of othering of the so-called colonizer. How, and my activist friends, it happens a lot, also in me. How can we move on from this? Because if we keep subtly othering, subtly saying, you know, Europe is bad, West is bad, whatever, you know, or it's not so open, but it's more subtler than that. How do we move beyond this othering and find a new ground where we can be a global family, or you know, and because yeah, this hurt and pain is real. How do I work with that? But how can I also move beyond and meet and find new ground to meet the so-called other? And is there another?
I would like to share.
Please, Pai.
One thing strikes me constantly in the last year and in the last months, weeks, days, here in Palawan, in the Philippines, there is a very intense process of negotiation happening. There is a positive return or shift away from the money system towards barter, a barter economy. And without needing money for people to conduct mediated transactions with each other, there is now the possibility of direct connection. It happened really, really fast. And it is now spreading across the island in so many ways. What fascinates me here is when we look at the history of language itself, language in a sense is also a system of negotiating meanings or values. I feel what COVID-19 contributes is a sudden process of negotiating or valuing. Evaluation process is really asking the question, what is the most valuable right now? And as people are held back from their normative habits, mostly consumerist, sometimes addictive, now we are creating so much space for so much context and codings to be heard. And for me, what shakes the very roots of my own foundations is that negotiations took time. It took place through deep history. And all of a sudden, what had been so rigidly structured is suddenly being reconstructed in a span of such a short amount of time. So what do we do now as we come into a trading process is what I'd like to bring into observation. There's a sense in anthropology that cultures evolve when there's a meta-language at play. And if we think about the Lacanian notion that language structures our consciousness, listening to you, Naveen, Ankh, and Ruth, our language stores very right-brained orientations of something that doesn't exist within linguistic formations that now need to, in the beginning, be felt, meaning through pure experience, needs to confront schools. In the Philippines, what excites me is that the president of the Philippines and the secretary of the Department of Education has announced that kindergarten to 12th grade students will not have face-to-face classroom time indefinitely. It doesn't matter how long, until the children are safe. So the classroom system is debunked, and online learning, rhizomatic learning, what in Walter Ong is described as secondary orality, how modern technology actually brings back a tribalism, a feedback system that wasn't so present in the age of the printing press. We're able to spread our minds and our consciousness in that yogic tradition that for sure needs to begin with embodiment. Not the notion of the body from the Cartesian sense that created the split between the mind and the body, but how is the body actually an embodiment, not just as a static thing, but as a process, a becoming. So I will be an apt listener and viewer of probably an acceleration within our language. Being locked down, being socially distanced, somehow now that students are going to access more information outside the classroom than inside the four walls, their minds will, like kaboom, will shift, will be stunned in a secondary orality. And what I feel comes upon us is a secondary literacy, where the contributions of Western thought that has so much systems of references, to borrow some of what we've stored for so long. If we could offer this with confidence, with peace, and with the intelligence that works through the dance, through the song, through the ritual, I feel there's a lot of hope, actually, that is ahead.
Wow.
Beautiful. Thanks, Pai.
Thank you, Pai.
Ruth?
Othering. Great question. Thank you. Thank you. Really important. I don't think we should be afraid of it. I think but what we have to have in the holding of it is that it's not privileging one over another. That's the difference. When we have recognition of your individual uniqueness, the glory of it, and I'm curious as to that, rather than the assumption that if you are this, then I am this. And if we can hold in that a recognition, but also of the differences, while also holding in the reality of all that is the same, I think that's important, that we should not move away from acknowledging that there is a colonial construct, that there is a global dome of thinking based upon that, and that there is a way of being in cultures that is based on other forms, and I describe that as indigeneity. And that's a language that, once again, it points to it. It's not it. It's difficult, because the language of that I'm speaking at the moment has its own framework within it as well. And in saying that, I'm a parent of 2 children, but I have lots of nieces and nephews and aunties and uncles and grandparents that we'll take care of and look after. And an important role that I have is that if I see one of my grandchildren or one of my nephews go to put his finger in the fire, I'll tell him, that's going to burn you, brother. You better look out. Watch out for that. And he might be mucking around and he may choose to burn himself. Now, when he burns himself, I'll come in, oh, Bubby, come in here, and I'll teach him the medicine that will help heal it. And he will know that plant, Kanigong, to pick it and what to pick to help soothe it. Without the burning, he would have never potentially have learnt that remedy to come. Bringing attention to wounds is imperative before healing happens. You cannot just move forward. In our culture, pretty much most of our traditions and practices are about ways, the ebb and flows, that things come into connection and then they get disconnected. And so how do you come back into connection, whether or not that's to your family, to your children, to country, to creation itself? And so when, as an Aboriginal woman, and just remember, I said, I've got an Australian father, so I have both lineages within inside of myself and within my family structure and home, and responsibility to both cultures and ways of being. For me, the primacy of how we move forward, of seeing each other as spiritual beings, as emissaries to life itself, is moving away from a construct that if I point out your differences, that I am saying two things. One, that I am either superior or inferior, or if I point out a past transgression, that automatically I am seeking a punishment or shaming. That's heartbreaking, because that's predominantly what we see, is that the concept, if something has done wrong, then we shame you and we punish you. That is not our way of being. That's not what our grandparents teach. Our grandparents teach a collective responsibility and bringing people back into alignment with their purpose, that they matter, that every being matters, and that we are collectively offering that, what we matter, to matter itself, to every living matter.
Thank you.
So I don't think we should be moving away from othering, just not this.
Hierarchy, yeah. Dominating.
I have to interrupt for one moment, also for the sake of the context. We can continue this conversation, but James, who is holding the space here for us, asked me to make one moment here also for a collective feedback for the people who have to leave, because we are basically at the end of the time frame that we agreed on. And there's a little poll that people can give some feedback. James, if you want to do this, it takes a couple of minutes, but people who want to continue can continue after that, so it's not the end of the conversation.
Just for 10 minutes.
That's right. So here's this poll. It should be showing up on your screen. Please take a moment to fill it out for our presenters here and for IEC to plan future events. And if we want to continue the conversation, I want to volunteer a different Zoom chat so that we can clear the room for the next panel to prepare. And I'm happy to share a link to that in the chat for anybody that wants to continue.
Thank you, James.
The conversation.
And obviously no one has to stay or go to the other Zoom room and be part of it, including the panelists, because the agreement was only until now. But you know, as you wish.
I just wanted to thank Ruth for her sharing, and what I'm taking from it is to recognize the uniqueness of each without polarizing or fragmenting. Yeah, that's important. You know, othering might have its purpose and it has its value, as long as we don't polarize or fragment oneself from the other. Yeah, thanks, Ruth. It was very touching. Thank you.
Thank you.
Which is why all of it, in terms of what you all brought in, these epistemologies of depth of interconnection, where that is primary, makes that possible in a worldview that is absent that, which is the case in the West. It makes it very difficult.
And also just to make aware that the awareness of othering that you were bringing in is an awareness that usually at the center of a post-colonial power you are blind to, because it's basically the air you're breathing. The otherness, you are looking at it from the blind spot, from the place where usually everything is othered from. So just to also appreciate that you are able to bring these perspectives because you are living not in the blind spot that most of us usually tend to live in. Thank you for that too.
Wonderful.